Okay, this is our last section now, and you can see here that we're going into a section that will bring us to Vincent van Gogh, and that is Post-Impressionism. So in 1883, Renoir wrote that he had milked Impressionism dry and that it was a blind alley. That means once you sort of lose the sense that you need to make forms look more real, then where do you go from there? So once you just loosen up, that's it. New trends maintained bright impressionist palettes but rejected spontaneous recording of light and color, leading to more developed abstract and expressive styles. This art was described as avant-garde, the forward-looking harbinger of change. Four artists were examining properties of line, pattern, form, and color. Van Gogh and Gauguin were expressionistic. Cezanne and Seurat more analytical. Oh, yeah. This is my slide. This will be required. You need to know this for the quiz because I still think that this is the simplest way to see it. Following Impressionism, the avant-garde took one of two general directions, either becoming analytical or expressive. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, it soon will, I hope. So here's my little chart. At the very top is Renoir's Café, the Moulin de la Galette, and artists then diverged. Well, I should say the mainstream artists stayed in this Impressionist rut, so people were doing that for years, but the avant-garde diverges, and we get a group of artists who are trying to express their feelings and their emotions in their art over on one side, on the other side, no feelings, but it's all sort of a visual, analytical, sort of scientific approach to art, as you will see. So the first artist we're going to look at is Georges Seurat, who's one of the analyticals. He devoted his life to correcting the shallow aspects of Impressionism. There was nothing there. It was just color and dabs of paint. It was like eye candy. He juxtaposed small strokes of pure, unblended color, creating pointillism. So pointillism is his style. And this is his most famous pointillist work. It's called The Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte. So the palette, or the colors used here, the subject, is straight out of Impressionism. It's cool colors, and it's Parisians out in a park on a Sunday afternoon having fun. There's a variety of things here. The thing that is not impressionistic is the style. So he juxtaposed small strokes of pure and blended color, creating pointillism. This has long been the subject of conflicting interpretations, perhaps that idealize, perhaps satirizing reality. So I don't know. This is a close-up showing how all of these forms are just made by little dots of color. So here he wanted this gradient from a white to a deeper shadow, and he just created this with dots. And looking at that same skirt of that lady, this really shows you how not impressionistic it is, because it's painted as though it were almost like a marble column, that it is solid, that there's no sense of flowing softness of fabric, which the Impressionists would do for cloth. So all of these figures tend to look very solid, not loose at all. And what Seurat had to do, because of his technique, was he would draw all of these figures, kind of like a large coloring book. And then he would come in with his little paintbrush and make thousands of dots of color on this, filling it in. That's his style. Here's a photograph of somebody trying to recreate that in modern terms. Did you notice the monkey in the painting? Let's go back and see. The monkey right here, a little dog there, and a big dog there. So, yep, a photograph. There you go. Oh, sorry, I didn't know I had another monkey one coming up. Beautiful. So our next artist is an expressive artist. So we're going to go back and forth. I hope you can keep up with this. So this is Paul Gauguin. He lived from 1848 to 1903. He also rejected realism and impressionism in favor of a subjective expression. He believed color must be expressive because that was how the artist created. His style differed from the Impressionists because his color areas are flatter. And so you can see that really down here in the water, that he drew out this area and filled it in with these various orange. But there's no modeling, no loose brush strokes. It's very flat. He was an amateur, meaning he never studied. He never had a master teaching him how to paint. He just sort of picked up some paints one day and became a painter. He resigned his day job. I believe he had been a banker, and he just quit one day and decided to become a full-time artist. He deserted his family. He moved out of Paris. He moved out into a small town because his thought was that Parisian people were too sophisticated, that they'd been too spoiled by civilization. They were too false. And he wanted to go out into a small town and just find really authentic people who were just kind of natural and primitive. He used that word. It's not politically correct, but the artists at that time used primitive. Many artists think that people who are simpler, who are not sophisticated, have some basic honesty that Parisian people lack. So he moved out into the country, as I said. He moved down to the south of France and stayed with Vincent van Gogh for a little while, and then he finally just gave up altogether on France and moved out to Tahiti, and that's where this painting was made. So he's observing the life of the natives there, which he would have called primitive. And he also called the style of his painting synthetism, which mixed the observation of a subject with his feelings on the subject. So he's observing them, but he's also having feelings about them. And I wonder what the feelings are there. So a couple more of his primitive women in Tahiti. Now we're going to look at Vincent van Gogh. He adapted Seurat's technique. So Seurat was the guy who did the pointillism. And he painted in free, multi-directional impasto lines. The Starry Night evokes the new tradition of expressionism, art that exaggerates aspects of form to evoke subjective emotions rather than a reasoned response. So he's appealing to the viewer's emotions, and he's trying to express his own feelings about things. So here it is. Starry Night, perhaps his most famous, most well-loved of all paintings. So he started work as a missionary, and he started his painting career by painting pictures of the poor people he worked with. He became a full-time painter in 1880. He had some serious health issues. A lot of people have opinions about what exactly that would be classified as today. But of course, medical science was not where it is now. So it could have been epilepsy. It could have been bipolar disorder. Those are both things that are thrown out there. His brother, Theo, was an art dealer in Paris, and they corresponded in writing. So we have lots of letters that Vincent wrote to Theo, telling him what he was doing, what he was thinking about his art. So it's really nice. We have a complete record, pretty complete, of what was going on. And we know how sick he was. I mean, we can see that too. So the Starry Night here was painted while he was in an asylum. It shows a vast universe and galaxies, and even an animated cypress tree in the foreground, kind of cut off there. It's a personal, expressive vision of this scene. So you can tell that he's feeling something about it. It's almost a sense of wonder, but it's almost like being overwhelmed too. But there seems to be so much movement and emotion in the sky The town seems sleepy and still compared to the sky. That's why the title refers to the stars. The work explores his contemplation of life and death. So, because he had all these letters, we know what he was trying to achieve. He said, instead of trying to reproduce exactly what I have before my eyes, I use color more arbitrarily, so to as express myself forcibly. Style too enhanced his expressive quality. So this one is just it's nothing very threatening. It's pleasant and beautiful. The colors are all cool colors except for the bright yellow, but they're all analogous on one side of the color wheel. And there's just a slightly larger version of it. And then this one, by contrast, has a completely different emotional content. If you look at this, and look at the angles and the painting, the modeling, the colors he chose for the walls and the ceiling, and the rendering of those lights is very disturbing too. And then look at the individuals sitting around here. And I'll tell you what he said about this. He said he wanted to create a place where one can ruin oneself, go mad, or commit a crime. So I think it does. It looks very unpleasant. It does not look like the kind of cafe I would want to go in. If I was walking by on the street and I looked in and saw this, I'd keep walking. So there's a self-portrait. He did several of these. And by impasto lines, I mentioned that, but I like to make sure you get that. You can kind of see that on the sunflowers. You could really see it if this was being projected on the wall in front of you in class. But impasto just means that the paint is put on very thickly so that it stands up. It's bumpy. He doesn't smooth it out when he puts it on. Oil paint is very thick. It's kind of like toothpaste. So think of it like that, or cake icing, and he would put it on and it wouldn't smooth out. It would stand up in ridges. And so you can see on all of these sunflowers is lots of bumps of oil paint. And here's another expressive artist, a post-impressionist. So this guy created the Scream. You've probably seen this. It's become a staple in pop culture, especially around Halloween, because it is kind of frightening and supernatural feeling. So Edouard Mook was a Norwegian artist, and his paintings tend to describe the modern psychic life. He felt humans were powerless against the forces of death, love, and their emotions. He was inspired by Gauguin, the guy who went to Tahiti, and he focused on uniting color, line, and form to expressive ends. The Scream here shows a landscape echoing the mouth and sound and depicts a feeling of overwhelming anxiety culminating in a primal scream by that figure in the foreground. It also symbolizes modern alienation. It merges symbolist suggestion with expressionist intensity of feeling. About this, he wrote, I sensed a shriek passing through nature, and I painted the clouds with blood. Some fan art of Peeps with the Scream made out of Peeps. I couldn't resist. It's just too funny. So here's another Mook painting. He just deals with a lot of kind of dark subjects, kind of eerie subjects. So this one is called The Vampire. And Toulouse-Lautrec is he's a post-impressionist. His style is really more associated with Art Nouveau, but he was a graphic artist. He did some posters, commercial art for the nightclubs in and around Paris, nightlife. Now our next art, so you don't need to know Toulouse-Lautrec. Our next artist is Paul Cezanne, and he's our other analytical artist. So we had Seurat with the dots, and now we have Cezanne. and they're completely different in style. Paul Cezanne was originally an Impressionist, and he hung out in Paris with those guys that we've already looked at. But apparently he had a very argumentative personality and just gave up on them, left Paris, and moved down to the south of France, where he stayed till the end of his life. He felt that Impressionism lacked form and structure. His style emphasized structural truth rather than photographic truth or an impression. So he's trying to be very analytical in the terms of the structure of what he's painting. He asserts intellectual control over what he sees, and he wanted to do Poussin over from nature. And you probably don't remember Poussin, but he was our very first proto-classicist. So he wanted to do it over again. So in Mont Saint-Victoire, he adopted a bright palette and loose brushwork to paint his landscapes. These were highly structured and merged drawing and modeling into a single process. His goal was to make Impressionism solid and durable, like the art in museums. So basically, he thought that Impressionism was a fad, and that in 10 or 20 years it would no longer be popular. It would never go to museums. He just thought it didn't have any lasting value. And so he wanted to take some ideas from Impressionism and convert it into a style that would be museum worthy. And that's why his stuff looks so different. So there's the mountain. So I hope you can see that there are dabs of paint, but it's all really controlled compared to, say, Monet. Here's a still life Cezanne did. A still life with basket of apples shows spatial ambiguities. The right side of the table is higher than the left, and the pastries are tilted up toward the viewer. The shifting viewpoints are not the product of incompetence, but rather a rejection of the scientific perspective in favor of positioning objects from multiple sightings. He would spend so long painting them. This is a little anecdote that I find amusing. This is real fruit, or it started off being real fruit, and real little pastries, little cakes over here. But he would work on this so long that while he was working on it, the fruit would shrivel up and go bad. It would start to decompose. So I can't imagine it sitting there that long. So his solution to that issue was to buy fake fruit and use that instead. So apparently this is all fake fruit. It was made of wax. And here, just some more Cezanne to show how structural he is. In the upper left painting with the bathers, you can see he was working on a triangle as being sort of one of the major components of his composition. And down below, we have some houses in a landscape that are very structural, not at all looking impressionistic, I don't think. So this is a review. This was my theory. And we had, going from Impressionism, we had these three expressive artists over here. So Mook, Van Gogh, and Gauguin. And then on the right, we had our two analyticals. We have Cezanne and Seurat there. Now we're almost at the end, so just hang on, because this guy's going to show up as a quiz question. So Auguste Rodin is the main sculptor we're looking at now in the last part of the 19th century. Another French guy, he's been called a realist sculptor, but I think his style is more impressionistic. I don't know. He is what he is. But anyway, the book says he's realist. He's fascinated by the human body in motion and the play of light on 3D surfaces. He failed to get into art school, and it caused him to assist other sculptors, and that's where he learned his trade. So this was called The Burghers of Calais, and it comes from a medieval story where the village of Calais had, I believe they were under siege. It was part of the 100 Years' War between England and France, and 6 men offered their lives to save their city. And the group here is choreographed, active but wandering aimlessly, showing pathos and depicted at eye level for relatability. Critics in Calais were not pleased with the exaggerated expression. I think I have another one. Yeah. So this is his most famous work, The Thinker, but that's not the one that was chosen for the textbook. So I just wanted you to see that this is the guy who brings you The Thinker. So now I told you that he's considered realist, but I don't think this is that realistic. I think that there's a lot of sort of impressionist treatment of surfaces here. And there's a large collection up in Raleigh at the North Carolina Museum of Art, an entire gallery of Rodin works, because sculptures can be duplicated by taking casts from them. So it's very common to see the same sculptures in more than one museum. So Camille Claudel, the assistant and later mistress to Rodin, was herself an accomplished sculptor. The Waltz, which we're going to see, is a celebrated sculpture of a dancing couple in the nude. After a government inspector called the nudity indecent, she added a swirling cloth to the woman's lower body. Sinuous poses recall fluid lines of the Art Nouveau. So here's this dancing couple. It's hard to imagine them without this swirl of fabric, but I guess originally they were just stark naked. But Camille Claudel, the assistant to Rodin, so that's where she learned the skills and the art of bronze casting. This is very small. It's 9 7/8 inches tall, so it's just something that would fit on a tabletop in a house. Very small. Now, here are your poll everywhere questions. So I'm going to stop talking because I've been talking too long. There you go.